I didn't cry, right? And these emotions that normal people would feel, I just I didn't nothing happened. It was like I was dead inside. And I realized that I had just witnessed a life pass away and I felt nothing. And that was a turning point.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Amanda Cunningham, a nurse leader who has transitioned into Healthtech, where she's changing the landscape of care delivery through virtual nursing solutions. After starting her career as a PICU nurse, Amanda faced nurse burnout and knew it was time for a new direction. She moved into leadership roles in case management and population health, eventually making a more significant pivot into Healthtech, where she now combines her clinical expertise with technology to reshape how patient care is delivered. In this episode, we'll dive into Amanda's journey from bedside nursing to sales in the Healthtech space, the importance of supporting clinicians, and how nurses can find opportunities to make an impact beyond direct patient care. Amanda, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that, lots of nurses have questions about the health tech world, so I'm excited to kind of dive into that with you today. But first, I'd love to get some background on you out there so that people kind of understand your perspective and where you're coming from. So I'll let you kind of jump in and share a little bit about like your early nursing career, just wherever you feel like makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated, I don't know if I really want to admit when I graduated, but it was back in 2007. And so I started my career right out of nursing school. I was a diploma grad. So one of the last freestanding really diploma nursing programs here in our state of Virginia. And so I went right into pediatric intensive care, which is something that, everybody kind of tells you start in med surg and get those basic skills and things like that. And so it was a big leap. I had worked in a ICU during nursing school, which I think kind of gave me some of those skill sets to kind of go right into critical care as a brand new nurse. But it definitely provided some challenges that I wasn't ready for. And I spent I did about 6 years, right under 6 years maybe, in pediatric intensive care. And I had done 2 years at one hospital and was kind of at a point in my career where I was ready for a change, right? And I was like, maybe I need to dive into something different. So I went into pediatric ER. I relocated, went into pediatric ER. I spent literally like 4 months in ER and was like, I'm ready to go back to ICU.
ER and ICU they're different breeds.
Yes, I can say that because my husband is actually an ER nurse and we are different breeds.
That's funny. Yeah, I totally get it. I'm a strange crossover. I did pediatric ER and PICU, but I think that I still lean towards ER instead of ICU. But it's funny. They are two totally different worlds.
100%. 100%. But yeah, so I spent, almost 6 years in pediatric intensive care. And, I got to a point in my career that I hated going to work, right? And so I got to this point, I don't think that anybody prepares you. No nursing school that we go to, no preceptor experiences can prepare you for what you witness when you are a nurse. And, like I said, I had worked in ICU. I worked adult ICU all through nursing school as a nurse tech, kind of saw that side of it. But PEDS has its totally different challenges. You're not caring only for one patient, you're caring for an entire family and everything that entailed. And so, I experienced, my first rape patient. I experienced my first burn patient, my first child abuse patient. And I got to a point where I was like, if I have to go into shift today and I hear one more baby cry, like I'm going to lose it. And, at the time I'm in my early 20s and I didn't know what that meant. Like I just thought that was nursing, right? Like I just thought that was part of it. It's not. I came to realize that that's not really how you're supposed to feel. So I had, life, I always tell people life has a funny way of putting you where you belong or where you need to be. And I ended up having an arm injury. I had a really traumatic patient. I had a child fall from a balcony and I will never forget it. I still can see her in my head if I close my eyes. And we're talking, this is 20 years later. And I realized at that point, after we had, kind of done all we could do and we couldn't save her, I didn't cry. Right. And these emotions that normal people would feel, nothing happened. It was like I was dead inside. And I realized that I had just witnessed a life pass away and I felt nothing. And that was a turning point. During that case or that patient, we had been administering 60 cc's of blood, right? And so you're pulling him up from the blood bag and pushing him in as hard as you can. And I had been having some issues in my wrist. And so we actually ended up developing an ulnar nerve lesion. And I couldn't go back to work after that patient. I had lost total use of my right hand. My fingers had gone numb. And I ended up pulled out of work for 4 weeks. And as a 20-something, that was detrimental. I didn't know about short-term disability and all of those things. And so I was like, how am I going to work? And a friend of mine had gone into case management. And from there, that was kind of a new journey for me. I had to find something different. So that's kind of what steered me away from bedside initially. It was just kind of a life experience that happened. But what I learned as I kind of made that one first pivot in my career, right? See, you like how I did that?
I do.
But yeah, it just happened very naturally, but I had to find another income, somehow. And it was away from bedside at that point.
Yeah. I can really relate to a lot of what you're describing, like as a PICU nurse, as a pediatric ER nurse. And I don't know, maybe someone listening today has the answer out there. If so, they should email me. But I don't know how you prepare a nurse for what they're going to see in practice. I would say I think that I don't think I got any preparation really. So maybe something would have been better than nothing.
Yeah.
And I know that there are healthcare facilities who are trying to do better now with supporting their nurses, and providing, resources and debriefs and things like that to kind of help them cope with what they're dealing with. But I think that that's a part of nursing that people outside of nursing think that they have a concept of, but maybe don't fully understand. And how could they, right? How could they understand exactly what that's like? And they don't necessarily need to, but I think that it is an aspect of the nursing profession that is perhaps taken a little bit for granted, just how difficult it is to deal with that and how really it's on the individual nurse to figure out how they're going to deal with it.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. We talk in nursing school, right? We hear them say self-care. And so for us, we hear self-care in nursing school and it's okay, exercise and eat right and, get your nails done or get a massage, and that type of thing. And massages aren't going to fix what I saw and what I witnessed, right? And I didn't know at 23, 24, 25, even, I think I left and I was 27, maybe. That's not what I needed. And we would have patients that would come in with incredible trauma or incredible situations that were that were very difficult to navigate, right? And when we would have these experiences as a team, right, we would kind of connect with each other
Right.
and recognize that that was really hard that we just did or whatever we just dealt with. And at the time, I think there was not a focus on the need to provide us services. And again, yes, our hospital had EAP. Okay, but at 23, what does EAP mean to me? And I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea, right? I didn't know how to navigate those benefits. Or we would have the chaplain come in and do a debrief when we lost a patient that had been a long-term patient. And I can tell you from experience that losing the long-term patients for me was never the devastation that I experienced when I was losing an acute trauma patient or I was
Mm-hmm.
losing a patient that we weren't expecting to lose. That was totally different. And so I think we're getting better as an industry. I think we have to get better as an industry. Matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, it was kind of National Suicide Prevention. And, I saw this article that they're talking about, the CDC estimates that nurses are 18% more likely to die by suicide than our general population. That's scary.
Yeah.
But with what we see and what we do and kind of bearing that burden of what could we have done differently or how could we have saved them differently, or that's a very heavy, heavy load to bear. And how do we deal with that?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew the answer to those questions. You know, hopefully some smart people out there can figure it out and implement it, because I think that our profession needs it desperately. Because yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, you graduate at what, 21, 22, and you're just like thrown into it. So yeah, it's interesting. And like nurse burnout has become such a buzzword,
As
and it's good that it's getting awareness, but I almost wonder if it's become like too much of a buzzword to where it's like a word that's being used without like real action being taken to solve the problem. And some of the things that you're describing about like dreading going into work and like that not crying after losing a patient and not recognizing that that was burnout at the time.
great.
I was the same way. Like retrospectively looking back, I was certainly burnt out in my last couple of years at the bedside, but I didn't know that while I was in it. So it's funny, not funny, haha, but funny that you had that injury at
Yeah.
that time that kind of like forced a change. And so let's talk about that pivot some. Talk to us about like the role that you then pivoted into and like what exactly that entailed, and anything about that transition that you found easier or more difficult than maybe you might have expected.
Yeah. So I actually went into telephonic case management. I tell everybody I did telehealth like before telehealth was cool, right? So this
Uh-huh.
was this was back, back in 2012, 2013, pre-pandemic, anything really where we were connecting with providers via our cameras. And I remember everything was done via the telephone, right? So I would call my patients. I interacted with individuals that had chronic conditions, new diagnosis of cancer. Pediatric patients, of course, were my specialty. And so I kind of worked with the families. And the way that it kind of worked was that employers provided this care management service to their employees and their families to make sure that individuals were receiving the right care at the right time and knowing how to navigate their benefits. Again, I just talked about EAP, right? So many patients don't know what kind of benefits their employer offers, and how to navigate healthcare is also very confusing. And I think we all understand that and see
Yes.
that. And so that was really the role that I took. Not only health literacy and teaching patients, new diagnosis of diabetes. This is how you should be checking your blood sugars. And let's talk about your diet and exercise, things of that nature. But also, do you know about, your max out of pocket? Or do you know what your deductible is going to be this year? Or do you know how to navigate your pharmacy benefits? And you have copay assistance cards out there by manufacturers to use. And so, a lot of people don't receive the care that they need because they don't know how to access it. And that
Mhm.
really became my role in care management. And that's, I kind of served when I was at that organization in a couple different roles. I was the nurse on the other end of the phone, right? Talking to Mr. Smith and telling him to take care of his diabetes. But then I transitioned into a nurse leadership role. And then from there, I transitioned into client management. So client management has a little bit of a different perspective, because what we do is we ensure that the care that we're delivering to a larger group of people, right? So a larger population, is what the employer sees as being beneficial. And then making sure that we're doing, we're getting files in and processing medical claims correctly and eligibility claims correctly. And, learning a lot about data and learning a lot about outcomes. And that has been really impactful in my career and kind of how I've kind of navigated to the point that I am in today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when you first started dealing with data, I feel like this is kind of a foreign concept to nurses. How did you learn how to work with data and, pull an analysis off of the data that you're looking at? Was that more just like on the job? You had someone kind of like teach you how to do it? Or how did you kind of get yourself up to speed with that?
Yeah. I think as nurses, we don't give ourselves enough credit. Let me start with that, because we
I
are data
agree.
people, right? And people don't realize that. We look at vital sign trends, right? We look and we automatically know, like, this patient's heart rate has dropped below 60 and they've been maintaining in the 110s. And that is a change in trend. And that is data. And we're able to look at those things and make a decision on how to appropriately take care of our patients. And so we do data every day. And
Yes.
so it's looking at data differently. So in care management, I started, at the bedside, I was looking at one patient, right? And I was analyzing the data there and what were my outcomes. If I'm navigating a vent, right, and I'm trying to titrate that vent and get that patient off that ventilator, I'm watching that data. When I got into care management, I was watching a different kind of data, right? I was watching their medical claims. I was making sure that, okay, I know as a nurse that if you're diagnosed with diabetes, what your blood sugar should run, where your A1C should be over time, how many refills of your medication you should have been taking, right? And so I can kind of discern what that patient's health status is going to be. Then from there, when I got into nurse leadership, I was just looking at a larger aggregate of data, right? So instead of looking at that individual patient, I started looking at, like, how was the nursing team performing as a whole, right? Were we meeting our metrics? Were we delivering an ROI, right? A return on investment? How are we moving the needle on the population? So I would run a report and look at, okay, this patient population that has diabetes, before our nurses started working with them, they were not getting their diabetic retinopathy screenings, right? Now that a nurse is involved, this many patients are now getting it. And so I was watching how we move the needle and how we make sure that people are getting the care that they're supposed to be getting. So that's where the data starts to come in. It's no different, right, than watching a patient figuring out, well, are they going to go where we need them to go, right? Or is the outcome going to be what we want it to be? And it's the same thing kind of with what I started doing as a client manager. One of the things that we do, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that when companies hire other companies, they have what's called service level agreements. And so the company says, if we're going to hire you, we want you to take really good care of our patients. And we're going to see that because the overall A1C of our entire population is going to go down, right? And so as somebody that's in client management, I've got to look at all that data and say, yes, we hit that metric and we are doing what we promised we would do. So that's how I got into data. Really, it's a natural progression of the path, right?
Yes, I love that you call that out, because I think that there's a lot of different transferable skills that nurses have, and maybe sell ourselves a little bit short because we're not fully recognizing the transferability of those skills. And granted, I think that it can be hard. Like, if you've only ever worked bedside hands-on with patients, it can be hard to like view how those things apply in another context. But, hopefully like listening to this podcast and hearing things like this will, make that light bulb turn on for some nurses the next time that they're like, looking at vitals over the last 12 hours and seeing something concerning. And then like, then taking we go that step further too, of we analyze the data and then we make a recommendation. We go to the doctor and we say, hey, like, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I think we need to do. And it really is no different in the business world. Just a different data that you're looking at is all that it is.
No, you're exactly right. And I mean, it's very similar to the role that I do today, right? I'm looking at data across the industry now. And so my data collection is, what are we seeing as a whole industry? How are we seeing, why are we seeing nurses leave the bedside, and how do we mitigate that? And what are some ways that we can help, right? And what are some proven interventions, right, to help prevent nurses from leaving the bedside? And so I guess data is just what I've always done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so that's cool that you can kind of recognize like the progression from bedside to that, like the next level of that in your client management role. And
Yeah,
then after that, you took on a larger leadership
I
position,
did. I
correct?
did.
So
Mhm.
tell us some about that experience.
Yeah, that was a doozy, my friends. One of the things that I've talked about kind of in my career is I've always been somebody very focused on relationships, right? And so that is something that I still do today. And even at the bedside, right? That relationship that you create with that family, that patient, it will continue for a lifetime. Because they will find you on Facebook, right? Even though you probably don't want to. Um, but anyway, so I had a partner, right, when I worked in care management, and I had been a client director, and so they came to me and said, we're looking at developing a program, and we would like you to help us build it. And so essentially I built a care management program from the ground up. And it was kind of like a startup. If anybody's ever worked in a startup, right? But that's essentially what we did. So we developed a care management program a little bit different from the one that I had been working at. I kind of talked about that health literacy and some of the pieces around patients understanding their true benefits. And so we really became an extension of the employer, right? Being able to almost like having a nurse on staff. And essentially, that's really what we were. HR would refer their employees to us directly, and we would help them navigate whatever was going on with their health, ensuring that they were utilizing their benefits correctly, understood kind of what that looked like for them, along with some of the health literacy and taking care of their patients. So it was a journey. I will tell you that. I did it for about 3 years. And if anybody's ever started their own business, you know this, right? It becomes all consuming. It's what you think about before you go to bed. I used to have to keep a Post-it note on the side of my nightstand because things would come to me in the middle of the night and I would write
Yep.
things down.
Yep.
Shower, you're like thinking about it. That's when all your ideas come to you. Is it middle of the night or the shower? I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, my best thinking comes when I step away from my desk and take my dog for a walk. Thank goodness I have like the notes app on my phone because that's when I have my greatest thoughts.
You kind of
But
find your time, right? When you like kind of clear your head, kind of sort of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is all encompassing though. And I think that the comparing it to a startup or starting your own business, like both of those things, I think are great comparisons. And that's a unique work environment.
There.
And I think it's important to call that out because as nurses are looking to pivot their career, they're going to be looking at companies of like all different sizes and levels of maturity. And it's important to know kind of like how you can expect things to be different based on like the stage that the company is at. And that startup phase can be a lot of fun. Like if that is a challenge that, you're up for and you enjoy kind of like, I think it can be like a game sometimes. Like I do marketing stuff and I think that it's really fun to like try different things and see what levers work and result in growth and which ones like don't and learn from that. And it's like an iterative process. So I think that it is important to call out. It is a challenge. It can be all consuming too.
Yeah.
It can also be a lot of fun, but it's worth noting that like that environment is not necessarily going to be the fit for everyone, or even if it is the right fit for someone at a certain stage, like it might not fit with like every stage of life that you're in.
You hit, my friend, you hit the nail on the head because that was where I was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why when I look, so it was pandemic, right? So I joined the organization in June. pandemic hit in March, right? And so it had not even been a year, and we launched our program in January. Nothing could have ever prepared me or the organization for what happened in March. And that, I think, took us. So I tell all my friends, right, that like wine.com was like knew my house, right? In my because I was in the startup environment. I had a 2-year-old, so we were potty training, and I had a 16-year-old who we were teaching to drive, because what else did you have to do during the pandemic? Because you couldn't go anywhere, right? So
Oh my gosh. That is wild.
yes. So, it was challenging in the fact that nothing could prepare us for the circumstances that we experienced, right? Because when you talk about healthcare and you talk about what happened during the pandemic, we had people that could not get care, and we knew, and people were scared to get care. That was the other thing that I think we totally forget about, was we were working with patients that had new diagnoses of cancer, or, were battling with CHF, and they would have exacerbations, or they had to go in and get treatment, and their families weren't allowed to go with them, right? Or they didn't want to go to the ER because what were they going to get, right? And what were they going to catch? And in those early days, we didn't know what we didn't know. And so for us as care managers, and for the team that I supported, that was a crazy time for us, finding our way as a new organization, but then also finding our way with a new way of care delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. You were up against all of the challenges in that phase, personally and professionally, it sounds like, all at once.
Yeah, I would do it over again in a heartbeat. And I don't question that decision. I would go back and build that program again in a heartbeat. The lessons that I learned, the care we delivered, the ability that we could navigate that as we did as a team, the camaraderie that we developed. We were a very small team. There was only 6 of us. That was that time that I spent with those individuals and the patients that we served during that time, I will cherish for the rest of my career, truly, because I've impacted a lot of lives at the bedside, but that piece of care that we delivered in such a time of uncertainty was unlike any I hope we never experience again. It didn't change it.
I was about to say, you have to come out different on the other side of something like that than you go into it. And, lots of lessons learned, lots of skills developed, some lessons learned the hard way, and some skills, trial by fire, but, it definitely, equipped you for whatever could come next. And something did come next. I think that you said that you decided, to not necessarily take a break, but leave that type of position where, you were just running 24/7.
Yeah, I did. So I had done it for about 3 years. And one of the challenges was I was kind of at a different point in my life, right? I had small children at home. Well, one small child at home. And then my son was getting ready to go into his senior year, and I needed to be fully present. And so being a leader in a startup like that, I just wasn't there, right? So I was giving my daughter a bath and checking emails, and I'll never forget, I was checking emails in Disney World, and my husband was like, enough is enough. we've got to figure out a better balance. And so it was just time for me to make that step away. The beauty of it is that I was able to step away and find a new journey for me. And that team is still going strong. I stay in touch with that team, and they're still delivering amazing care in that organization. So I made a decision to leave leadership and just kind of take a step back and regroup, figure out what it was that I wanted. And one of the things that, during the pandemic, we learned about technology and how we can really truly deliver care that is equal, right? It's just care. It's just delivered in a different method. And so I took a role back in client management, but this time my role was a little bit different because I was utilizing technology and devices for patients. And so it was supporting hospitals and health systems that had employed these types of solutions. So it was a glucometer, it was a scale, it was a blood pressure cuff. and it was delivered to the patient's home. And so they had access to coaches, health and wellness coaches. And so they're really helping their employees and their dependents get the care that they need. But then also, how are they providing physician services, right, to their employees and their dependents? And so during this whole process, and I think this is probably a really important call out, is that I made the decision to step back from a leadership role because I kind of had I had a loss of a colleague that I like couldn't get over, right? And so my boss at the time when I worked at the care management organization, she had a massive heart attack. I talked to her at 11 in the morning, and by 2 o'clock that afternoon, she had passed away. 50 years old, just, it was random. And it caught all of us by surprise. And so I couldn't get past it. And I kept going, what is wrong with me? Why can I not move forward? And so I actually went into counseling and I went into therapy. And through that, I realized that everything that I had experienced from the bedside, right, it kind of all caught up with me, right, in my 40s. And I had to deal with those things. I had to navigate those things differently. And kind of taking that step back from that leadership role allowed me to do what I needed to do personally, to deal with the emotions, to deal with what I had been carrying with me for so long, and kind of unravel that. And that was the space that I needed to really understand that it was what I experienced back then is something that not everybody ever sees, right? And so that burden that we carry with us, we need somebody to hold that for us. And it's okay to ask someone to do that and kind of facilitate healing. Really, I had to heal from everything that I had experienced at the bedside. And taking a step back allowed me to do that. And that was so important for me. And it's actually become my story, right? I work with hospitals and health systems today, and I talk about why they need to implement mental health care for their clinicians, because we don't want them to have nurses leaving the bedside because they don't want to be at work anymore, right? We've got to mitigate this substantial turnover of the bedside nursing team, because when I get 60, I'm not going to have anybody to take care of me anymore.
Right.
Nurses,
Yeah. It's interesting that you were able to I'm sure that like going to therapy helped you to do this, but it's interesting to me that you're able to identify, what I'm struggling with now, years and years later, is connected to what I experienced at the bedside. And even more incredible that you're able to like leverage your own story now in the work that you're doing today. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more exactly like kind of like what these solutions, like the mental health support solutions are that, you are helping to sell and have health systems implement to support their clinicians, and how your own experience, both as a nurse and just dealing with the burnout and the trauma that you've seen, how exactly that comes into play in your conversations and like day-to-day work today.
Yeah. There's a connection that happens. And I think you and I, have kind of experienced it, right? We have a lot of the same history. We have a lot of the same experiences. And if you've never been in the trenches and never experienced it, you just don't know what it's like, right? And so in my role, I'm able to have these conversations with health systems and nurse leaders and be able to tell them that I understand, right? I know where you've been, and I know where we're going. And so we need to be able to provide the help that our nurses need to really navigate the situations that they might experience at the bedside. And so within our organization, we actually have an entire entity. So we have a mental health program. And so it's actually digital. And then they can interact with coaches, right? Mental health coaches, but then they can also interact with therapists or psychiatrists for medication administration, And so by giving, I think one of the biggest things is that when I started to kind of be at the bedside and have these feelings, nothing validated it for me, right? And nobody validated that what I was feeling was okay, right? Or what I was not able to feel was okay, right? It was part of something else. And so one of the things that we have as an organization is we've recognized that digital content is important. Everybody navigates their health differently. By having modules that an individual can do, whether it's meditation, whether it's learning deep breathing exercises, whether it's interacting with a mental health coach or with a therapist or a psychiatrist, we meet people where they are on that journey. But I can tell you, when you have these like 10-minute vignettes of like meditation, deep breathing, that's something as a clinician, I can walk away from the bedside and I can go in the break room and put my headphones in and just zone out for 10 minutes. And I think we're getting to a point where we understand nurses need to step away from the bedside, right? They can't continue to work through their lunches. They can't continue to work through their breaks. It's just not conducive to our health, right? And so by, again, delivering care where that nurse is or that clinician is, allows them to get the help that they need on their terms. And I think that's a lot of some of the obstacles we face within an EAP program is a lot of times nurses only get a certain segment of therapy services, right? So if I go talk to my EAP, I might only have 3 services covered or 3 interactions with the therapist covered. And then I've got to find somebody else under my medical plan and tell my story again, right? Whereas if I have a continuity of care where I've been working with the same therapist for 3 years, there's something about that continuity that impacts the ability for us to really dig deep and share our journey and get into the nitty gritty of what's going on with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that the solution that you're selling and providing to these healthcare systems it's leveraging technology to meet these clinicians, because it is, I mean, and maybe that is like one good thing that came out of COVID is more use of tech solutions within the healthcare space, because we mentioned like people having limited access to care earlier and like not even knowing what benefits they have available to them. And it's hard to like take the time out of your busy life to find a therapist or someone who is supported by your insurance. It's either that or like find one that you can afford and like you're willing to pay for out of pocket.
Right.
Find time like on their schedule and then get yourself like there on a day off to like go physically be present with them, when you can accomplish so much virtually. And I think that we learned that through COVID is that virtual care, and you said it, like virtual care is still care, like, and people they use healthcare differently, and especially with mental health, I feel like everyone's approach to that is just going to be so personal that having something that they can easily access and provides them some optionality as to like how they're going to get that care and what form that's going to come in, I think is really special. And I can only imagine that when you're having these conversations to sell this product, like, I don't know, are people ever like, oh, wow, like this woman actually like has been there, done that, like she's experienced this. I mean, that just adds like a whole different level to the conversation that you're bringing to the table.
100%. And I think that's what has allowed me. We kind of talked about relationships, right? And the connections that you make. That has allowed me to really tell people, I share my story. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I've been in therapy, right? And I do it via telehealth. Because, and I will tell you that the fact that you kind of brought up having to go into an office, I live in a very rural community, right? And so there was this angst I had, right? About having to drive, right, locally. And what if somebody saw me, right, walking into this office? It's not something to be ashamed of, right? And I think there's this stigma as a clinician, as a healthcare provider in general. My husband is a former police officer turned ER nurse, right? And so he has seen some of the most traumatic injuries and accidents and shootings and, things like that. And there's a stigma amongst first line workers, right? And first responders that we are not allowed to not be okay. And that's so wrong because we're human.
I know. I do think that is starting to break down as like kind of I think, it hit so many of us so hard during COVID that I think, it reached that breaking point where people are throwing their hands up and saying, I do need help. Like, this is
Yeah.
too much. I don't know how any one person is supposed to bear this, but I totally agree with you that like historically there has been this, it's like a martyrdom within healthcare of like, well, this is just your job and you're just supposed to deal with it. And, however you deal with it, whatever, which is so crazy because in no other job ever are you seeing and dealing with like what we are on a day-to-day basis. It's like, yeah, this is my job, but other people are sitting down at their desk and answering emails all day and they might hear something sad on the news. Like, I'm
Right.
here hands-on with it. So yeah, I agree. It's absolutely insane for us to think that, we don't, it wouldn't be completely natural for us to need support processing these things.
Right. And I think that's one of the things. So not only do I work with, their leadership, right? Hospital and health systems leadership, but I also get to do in-services. And so one of the, or talk to clinicians or, so that's a piece of my role. And well, I think we'll probably talk about this transition to virtual nursing, but, a piece of that role was to have in-services with hospital and health system employees and talk about, especially, your yearly benefit fairs and things like that, and talk about what is the service that we provide and why is it important, or, how does it work? And so one of the things that I am incredibly proud of my organization for recognizing is they have content specifically for first responders and healthcare workers, because we are different and our experiences are different. And so I'm incredibly proud. They talk about, there's even some vignettes in there about loving a healthcare worker, right? Because sometimes it's easy to love,
Yeah. Yeah. We come with some baggage.
It's where, we come home from your 12-hour shifts and you just plop on the couch and you don't want to talk. You don't want to hear anything. You don't want to look at, you just want silence, right? And people don't always, like, it's kind of like, well, you don't want to talk to me, like my spouse, like, you don't want to talk to me. No, I really don't. I just need to decompress for 5 minutes. And then, so
Yeah.
We're just a little bit different, and that's okay. And that's why, we just need a little bit of different kind of care.
Absolutely. Well, it's really cool that you found this kind of niche within the health tech world. What do you think are some of the, I don't know if it's eye-opening that I'm looking for, or like, what do you think is the most rewarding or eye-opening part of being a nurse working in the health tech environment?
I think we've seen a big change, right, in healthcare industry. We're seeing more nurses being at the C-suite level tables, right? And I think, when I kind of transitioned. I've been with the same company a little over 2.5 years. And back in February, I actually moved from where I was working with our hospital and health systems about benefits. And I moved into a role where we're putting technology in inpatient rooms and looking at virtual nursing and how do we deliver telehealth within the inpatient care setting and in the ambulatory care setting. So it's a little bit different than using like our benefit services for employees and dependents. And one of the things that I'm finding, and I find it really interesting when we're talking about healthcare and health systems and the way that we're organized, is that there's still silos, right? And so, nursing kind of like functions within this silo, right? And then like tech kind of functions in this silo. And then, sometimes leadership is in a little bit of a different silo. And so how do we start to all work together to improve the lives of our clinicians or the care of our clinicians and our healthcare workers? But how do we also help to improve the patient outcomes in your patient experiences? Because studies are showing that it's all linked together, right? And so I think that's probably it's one of the biggest challenges as we face when we're talking about how do you integrate technology into a hospital and health system, and how do you get everybody on the same page, right? Because not just nurses are going to use it, right? Physicians are going to use it, or our chaplaincy program is going to use it, or our patient advocates are going to use it. And so how do you get everybody on the same page to change care delivery? And I think it's one of the biggest challenges. But once people kind of get it and they see that the sky is the limit on how technology can really transform care delivery, people are like, this is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a huge advocate for nurses having a voice and being involved in the development of technology, everything from like creating that product roadmap to like implementation, because that experience of working at the bedside is so crucial in every stage of that development of whatever that tool or software is going to be. Because like you said, like implementing these things in the healthcare environment is really complex. Healthcare is made up of very complex systems. It's kind of messy, like there's a lot of different teams and like software and systems, and like everything has to work together. And so, I think that having, utilizing nurses, everything from like, hey, like we have this idea. How can you see, like, where do you see the problems with this and how do you see it succeeding? All the way to like, okay, it's time to like roll it out on a unit. Like, let's talk to nurses about how that's going to go. And then you also have we need nurses still to be nurses, right, with the implementation of this technology, which with virtual nursing, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about like kind of what the nurse's role is like in that virtual nursing scenario.
Yeah. It differs depending on every organization. And this all goes back to data, right? And so we're going to tie this all back to data, because our organizations understand that we have to change the way we're delivering care, because we cannot create more nurses. The amount of nurses that are retiring, leaving the bedside, we're going to have so many openings that there's no more personnel to bring in, right? And so how do we make nurses at the bedside more efficient, right? And being able to continue to deliver high quality care. And so what we do is we work directly with healthcare systems to figure out, what are you trying to achieve, right? Is it improving nurse satisfaction, right? So your nurses can actually take their breaks, right? And actually gets to step away from the bedside for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. Is it improving your patient satisfaction scores, right? What are your patients saying and how they're getting care delivered, and how can we improve that? Or maybe it's the fact that they've got a 4-hour wait time in the ER because their nurses are so busy on the floor that they can't discharge their patients fast enough to be able to get these patients in the ER into a bed on the floor. And so we work with hospitals and health systems to say, what are you looking to achieve? And sometimes, more often than not, it's very multifaceted, right? We want to improve nurses' satisfaction. We want to improve patient experience, and we want to improve the throughput of our organization, right? And so what we do is we work with these hospitals and health systems to look at, what are your discharge times, right? And so how often, you probably experience this, I did, right? If you have a patient that's ready for discharge, but you're taking care of other patients, it might be an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours from the time that discharge order comes in before you can actually deliver your discharge instructions and send that patient home. So studies have actually found that, nurses spend about 40% of their time on administrative burden, right? So they're documenting in the EMR, they're completing that admission assessment. That includes everything from, in peds, it was like mom's gestational period, right? That's really long history. And it takes sometimes up to an hour to complete that. That's an hour from delivering patient care. And so if we can remove that burden from your bedside nurses to allow them to really complete those hands-on assessments, those hands-on tasks, things that cannot be completed virtually, then what does that mean for their shift? What does that mean for the quality of care that their patients are getting? So that's kind of what our overall and overriding mission is working with hospitals to say, what are you looking to achieve and how do we get you there? Virtual nursing has really become a buzzword, right? And I have to tell you that I love the idea of virtual nursing. I think it's amazing, but we're also seeing a real shift in care delivery. in utilizing virtual nurses, but also seeing how, some of our hospitals are going to team nursing models, right? So they might have one RN, one LPN, and, a PCT to deliver care in a more holistic kind of team setting versus one nurse, 6 patients, and you have to do all the care. And so they're just rethinking how care is delivered, and they're being innovative, whether it's using technology like what my company does, or, or redesigning their team structure. So we're really at the cusp of something pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I know there's a lot of companies out there that are like looking to solve this issue of like, okay, how do we unburden nurses enough to where they can provide better care? And I mean, those administrative tasks, I mean, if I didn't have to spend, who knows how long every shift sitting at the computer charting, you know, and sometimes, if in a code or like a critical situation, you have one nurse hands-on, but then you have a whole nother nurse at the computer charting everything that's happening. So then you have 2 nurses that are tied up for, the 2 hours that you're getting a patient stabilized.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that there's a lot of creativity around that right now. And it's cool that you get to bring your experience, and especially like working in a critical care setting too, where, you're juggling usually multiple, pretty ill patients who all have like competing priorities that are all very important and timely. So yeah, it's interesting that you've found your way, into figuring out what those virtual like solutions are going to be. I absolutely think that leveraging technology, whether it's virtual nursing or AI solutions or whatever, I think is going to be essential to our path forward. So it's exciting to see so many things in the works right now.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. And I think we have to be open, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things is a lot of times in healthcare, and I've heard this that, a number of times, that AI is scary, right? Or what is AI and what is that going to mean for me as a clinician, right? But I'll tell you, I have Teams, right? Microsoft Teams. And so I use Copilot. It's an AI generated, but it takes all my notes and all my meetings for me. And so, something like that can dictate, I could say something or ambient listening to be able to recognize if there's a need in a patient's room or there's a safety issue for me and be able to interact or intervene. That is an AI component. And so I think we have to be very cognizant when we're starting to have these discussions that AI is never going to replace the critical thinking that I have or the skill set that I have as a nurse, right? That clinical decision making that I have prided myself on and learned through 18 years of nursing is always going to be valid and important in the industry, right? Or in patient care. But how do we lower the burden, right? Whether it's using AI and ambient listening to help me document my assessment, right? If I'm able to say it out loud and AI can write it out for me and I just double check and make sure it says what it says, there's an administrative burden gone there. So I think we just have to be very open, eyes wide open, right? To what the possibilities are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of segues us perfectly into, how I kind of like to close out these episodes with just kind of a piece of advice from you to nurses at the bedside who might be feeling a little burnt out or stuck in their career. What words of wisdom would you leave them with?
Oh, goodness. Find out why you're burnout. No. I think when anybody's looking for a change, right? And so whether, when we talked about my move, right, from bedside to care management, it was a move that I needed, right, internally. And I dove in and didn't have any care management experience. But what I had was some of the skills that I knew I needed, right? I had the ability to have critical conversations with the patient, right? I was able to do an assessment, right, virtually or on the phone, and I felt confident in my assessment skills. And, so there's a lot of skills that we have as a clinician that really translate into a different type of nursing, whether you're looking to go from ER to case management, or you're looking to go into a different type of care delivery, whether it's technology or data. And so I heard this, and I think I shared this with you, Audrey. I heard this quote, and I believe her last name is Sandberg. And she said, when you're offered a seat on a spaceship, don't ask what seat, just get it. Right. And I have really taken that to heart. Because if you had told me, right, when I graduated in 2007, that my career would lead me to where I am today, that I would be working in health tech, right, and working on changing care delivery models, I would have laughed, right? Because I said, PICU was it for me. But you never know where your career is going to lead. And so when you're offered a role or you're offered an opportunity, and I think that's the big thing, an opportunity, take it. Take it.
If you'd like to connect with Amanda after today's show, you can find her on LinkedIn. Her profile is linked in the show notes below. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.